Hey, welcome back to another episode from the Doghouse Sports Podcast. Here again with my man Andrew to talk again about baseball, about another article that he wrote that is also up on our website. This one is West Coastal Elites. Are West Coast teams better positioned for future success? So please check that article out as this is just kind of like we talk it out, but that article goes way more in depth that we will go on here. So Andrew, I'll open the floor to you. Like, what was your inspiration behind this article?
Yeah, so I think my inspiration for this article kind of tracks all the way back to the World Baseball Classic last spring in 2023 when Japan beat the United States. And what was like a classic game. You couldn't have like written a better script.
Well,
Shohei Ohtani,
I
Mike
feel like
Trout.
I feel like we really got excited about that more so than usual. Like that World Classic seemed to get like baseball fans really excited in a way that and brought the baseball community country together in a way that I maybe hadn't seen as of recent. Would you agree with that sentiment?
I would agree. I think it just this World Baseball Classic, I feel like more than others had the star power, right?
Yeah.
That showed that it is truly like a global game. Like that, the Dominican Republic had like a stacked lineup. Like I thought they would have done a lot better than they did. They didn't get out of the group stage, but Puerto Rico had a great team. Venezuela had a great team. Mexico went on a Cinderella run. Like there was so many good teams, players, storylines, and it all just kind of to have it finish with that, one run down. You have the best American player probably since I don't even maybe Ken Griffey Jr. as far as just like pure hitter, and Mike Trout going up against Shohei Ohtani, who's just like the next Babe Ruth as far as like versatile skill. Like you can't overstate how good both of those guys were and their teammates, and to have the World Baseball Classic end in that fashion, kind of putting Japan in the center of the baseball universe. It really showed how far the game has come, especially in Asia, Japan and South Korea in particular. And it really got me thinking, like, with more and more of those incredible prospects coming to the MLB, are West Coast teams better positioned for future success because of their proximity and their ties to those organizations and then those different leagues?
Yeah, so you weren't just spitballing. You did your research and you found some like facts, some numbers to back up your suspicion. So just let me pull some of those numbers out there. Um so West Coast teams, so the West Coast teams um are the Angels, the Dodgers, the Padres, the Giants, the Mariners, and the Athletics for now.
Yeah, like just
And
truly on like the coast.
And so those only make up like 20% of the entire MLB, right?
Yeah, 6 out of 30, 20%.
Yeah. So if math is mathing, you'd assume then they would get like 20% of the Asian players or the but math is not mathing, right? And they actually signed a staggering 55% of Asian born MLB players.
Right. And their first, like in their first MLB contract, 55% of Asian born players from, South Korea and Japan originally signed with those six teams.
Yeah, and now I know like you looking down the road, you did see that that went down a little bit as to currently there's 39%. That's still basically double the expected 20.
Yeah,
Um
so there's currently only 18 players that came over from South Korea and Japan in the majors. So what I did was I looked at where they originally signed, and that's that 55% number, and then now the current team they're playing on. And
so
that's the number that is lower.
so I'm gonna play a little bit of devil's advocate here. So
Sure.
those are just numbers, right? Does that really, you think, have a major impact on the game of baseball?
I think it does. And I'll explain why. I think that the talent we're seeing coming out of Japan and South Korea, particularly when it comes to pitching, um, is incredible. You saw what Shohei Ohtani is, and granted, there's not that many Shoheis out there, but I mean, Yu Darvish has been a top pitcher in the league for a while now. You have Yamamoto, who just recently signed with the Dodgers, who kind of lit the world on fire at the World Baseball Classic, who seems to be the real deal. Um, you have a lot of other pitching prospects that have come over this year, mostly from that World Baseball Classic roster in South Korea and Japan. So it's going to be interesting to see how they do. But the more success that we're seeing from these Japanese players, the more willing MLB teams are going to be to invest in them long term. And I
Yeah.
think those West Coast teams that can sign them first, potentially sign them for less money, that's definitely an advantage to help them, build a team around long term.
Yeah, and at first glance, it might not be super apparent as like why does the West Coast have such a significant advantage? But in your article, you listed a couple key points. One being the proximity in general. The flight is so much shorter. It's still a long flight, but still significantly shorter from like California to Japan or South Korea comparatively, like to New York City, right? Like, and also, and also the Asian population is more dense in certain parts of the West Coast as well, right? So these are all factors that like you might not hit you over the head, but they do contribute to players initially signing and then also staying in the West Coast.
Yeah. One thing I will say, Beach, that I want to talk with you about on this podcast is that these are definitely advantages that the West Coast has, but I don't think any of them are insurmountable, right? Because
Well, that's a
it's
question I
still a
wanted to ask you is if you're an East Coast team, are there any strategies you can try to use to counteract? I mean, of course, the most obvious strategy is to give a buttload of money, right? But are there
yeah.
any other strategies that you see that East Coast teams could deploy?
I think there's a few things. One thing is actually using the time zone to their advantage. Teams on the East Coast, viewing wise, have a better chance of like being able to broadcast to Japan just because the times line up better. It's only a 2 hour time. Granted, it's like a day, but if it's like a 2 hour time difference on the East Coast than it is in Japan. So like theoretically, you could be saying, like as far as pitching marketability back to Japan for these players, you can say like there's a chance you're going to be seeing, the viewership higher amongst East Coast players. I think the biggest thing, if an East Coast team is serious about recruiting Japanese and Korean players, is investing in scouts,
Hmm.
being a presence in the baseball community in those areas, and just developing those relationships. So these players don't feel like you're just kind of whimsically chasing after them. If you build like
Yeah.
a solid scouting infrastructure in those areas, I think you can really develop good relationships and then start recruiting and signing international players from Asia, which like is going to be extremely important.
So, like to kind of like this wasn't in your article, and you might be unprepared to answer this, so feel free. But does that mean that the East Coast teams have an advantage when it comes to Dominican players?
Again, I think it comes down to building relationships and like the comfortability of an organization to recruit in international capacities. Because like I really think it goes organization to organization. Um, I'm a Phillies fan, so I often look at the Phillies as an example. Um, the Phillies have not had a ton of success developing and recruiting Latin American position players, but have had a lot of really recent success with pitching prospects. Ranger Suarez was signed directly from Venezuela. They've traded for, but have developed Christopher Sanchez and Jose Alvarado from the Tampa Bay Rays, who recruits heavy in that area. Um, it's really all about the infrastructure that the organization sets up to recruit. And I think what we're seeing is that a lot of these West Coast teams, maybe due to their proximity, maybe due to the larger, Asian populations and the marketability of these players, have invested more money in scouting players in Japan and South Korea, and it's paying dividends now.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned the Phillies, so you have an example, right? A recent example of how. So you want to dive into that? Basically, the Phillies offered more money, and
Yeah, I think that it's no secret that the Phillies went after Yamamoto as well. Obviously, he signed with Dodgers. There's a lot of discussion about whether that was because he wanted to play with Shohei, whether he wanted to be on the West Coast, whether he felt more comfortable in that organization. But there's multiple teams that pursued him. And it came out last week that the Phillies actually offered the most money, which is also on a side note in like crazy money. Like Yamamoto was guaranteed the most money ever for an MLB pitcher, and he's never thrown a pitch in America besides the World Baseball Classic, which is crazy. Like, I'm not saying he's not deserving. Like, he's got all of the skills you'd want, and he's 25. So, like, yeah, obviously you want to invest in that. But if I'm the Phillies, I'm sounding alarms a little bit because it's like, what else can you do? Right? Like, you offered him the most money. You put together what sounds like a compelling presentation to him. They said Bryce Harper sent in like a video personally recruiting him. Um, Recently, the Phillies have invested more heavily in scouts in Japan, so like they're clearly building up their infrastructure. I think, and maybe this is me putting on my fan tinfoil hat. I think that the Phillies leaked the information that they paid the most to show, like, hey, other Japanese prospects, specifically Roki Sasaki, we're open for business. We want to pay a boatload of money to get an ace pitcher, and we're not afraid to invest in international prospects anymore.
yeah, no, that sounds sneaky, but it really is smart, right? So yeah, I mean, who knows? But I mean,
And
it's
yeah,
always exciting for
the
new prospects, right? And I feel like I have followed baseball my whole life, but I feel like I've really picked up on it more in the more recent. So I feel myself
mhm.
getting excited again about baseball. But I also feel like maybe it's just not me. I feel like you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it feels like maybe the country in general is getting a little bit more into baseball again. Is that totally off base?
I think that's it's very strategic, right? I think the star power is incredible right now. There's a lot of really young and exciting players. I think the rule changes help too. I think people were excited by, the quicker games. Um, and I just think that the game is in such a good place right now as far as like how competitive it is. And baseball's always been a competitive sport. It's very hard to predict like who's going to win, who's going to lose. Um, so I think the game's in a great place right now as far as, developing more fandom and just the overall product of the league.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm definitely going to try to get to some games this year, and so I'm pumped. So, but yeah. So no, like Andrew, thanks again for writing that article. Once again, that's on our website. We only scratched the surface of it. He has a lot more great content and research done in that article. So please be sure to read it and check it out on our website. But but yeah, I think is there anything else you wanted to add about the topic?
I think it's going to be extremely intriguing this year, how the pitching free agent signings come specifically from Japan, fare in a full season of the MLB.
Yeah, because that's true. Because
Because
because like you mentioned, uh, no, besides the World Baseball Catholic or Classic, no previous experience or no experience in MLB, so we truly don't know how he's going to perform.
I think if you see success, whether that be living up to the same, numbers they're producing in Japan and South Korea, or just like a little bit below, even like an 80% clip, you're going to see a lot more Korean and Japanese pitching prospects in particular, because baseball has a shortage of starters right now. There's not a lot of teams with full rotations. So I think that they're going to, if this, I don't even want to say experiment, like if these prospects pan out, these free agent signings pan out, the markets are going to flood open.
It will definitely be fun to watch for sure. In conclusion, once again, thank you, Andrew. Check out the article on our website. This has been another episode of the Doghouse Sports Podcast, fans' best friend. Have a great day, everyone. Until next time.